Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, Giannis speaks out again. Something we've said quite a bit so far this season. Only speaks out's probably the wrong way to phrase it. He sat down with Eric Nehm of The Athletic during the All-Star break. So we'll take a look at some of those comments that Giannis made. A very, very forthcoming Giannis, as he has been all season long. We'll get into that and the MVP discussion. We are now outside of the All-Star break or coming out of it. It is officially time to take a look at the field and what Giannis would need to do to climb back towards the top of that list. We'll get into it coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network, joined by Camille Davis. You can hear her on the Technical Foul podcast and during football season on the Carry the G in MKE podcast. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts, viewable on YouTube as well, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Camille, there is no shortage of Giannis content that is out there, as
Or
we've
Bucks
heard
content.
from him. Yeah, all through the season, we've heard from him. Of course, the documentary came out during the All-Star break as well on Monday. And then earlier on Wednesday, the interview comes out with Eric Nehm in The Athletic that Giannis sat down with him and went through what has been a tumultuous, maybe a bit harsh, but a very up and down season. And that was one of the phrases that was used the most throughout this interview was ups and downs. Everything that Giannis said in there, in that sit down with Eric, a very lengthy one that we would encourage everybody to read at The Athletic. But everything that he said, it's not a surprise, as we've heard parts of this and most of it from Giannis throughout the course of this year. But to me, what I was most struck by was that phrase of up and down. And I think there were some other things in there where you got more of a glimpse of Giannis's mindset and what went into everything when we talk about some of these moves that were made with coaching, especially during the season.
Yeah, and pairing this article coming out with the documentary coming out, like I watched the documentary, I finished it yesterday, which was outstanding. Like Rise was a good movie, Disney perspective and everything, but being able to see Giannis tell his own story in his own words with his family telling the story along with them, like it was just a different perspective. And also seeing Eric Nehm in the documentary was like, oh, that's what's up. But pairing that with then seeing this article coming out, and it just reemphasized that Giannis is fanatical about trying to get back to the mountaintop in the NBA and winning another championship. And when he's talking about this season, he mentioned the fact that this season has brought out in him being more vocal of a leader than he's ever been, saying that he felt like he really had to with Adrian Griffin was in town because he is trying to do anything that it takes to win. And him being more vocal has come. I mean, we've seen it. We saw him on the sideline drawing up a play. We've seen him after games trying to encourage his teammates by just saying, hey, it's not just your effort, but my effort. He's trying to lead by example as well. And I know the other players on the team see that energy, pick up on that energy. Damian Lillard was on, I believe it was Trae Young's podcast. It's hard to keep up with who has what shows nowadays, but he was talking about just like pros and cons of playing with Giannis. And one of the pros, he was like, this dude is like, he does not stop. His motor is ridiculous. Like some guys, when they're nicked up or they're hurt, they might take it easy or they might look to sit out. And he's like, no, Giannis is coming out here still full speed going at you. Like it does not matter how he feels. He is going for it. And I pair that again with this article that was revealing about just how he's felt about this season, saying there's no room for excuses, got to be better, and just how much he wants it and how he doesn't want to look back and say like, hey, I missed an opportunity here. And that made me think of, in the documentary, it showed the behind the scenes, of course, of the finals run and him injuring his knee, and just saying, like, once they made it to the finals, he pretty much was, I don't really care about what the prognosis is with my knee. Like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I have to take advantage of it. And he understands that with this season too. Like, you have Damian Lillard, you have a team that's built to be a championship contending team, and he doesn't want to waste this opportunity either.
Yeah, and that's the other fascinating part too, is the knee injury that obviously everybody that experienced it in real time, we remember it, and we remember that uncertainty over you came together as a team to win those final 2 games in the series against the Hawks, but there was also this cloud over the team of, great, we made the finals, but we're not going to have Giannis. So I don't know how happy you truly are. And then as we move closer and closer over, because it was what, the 3rd of July, I think, where they clinched their spot in the finals. And as you started to move through the weekend and into that week, you started to hear more rumbling of Giannis is going to play. And that's
Yep.
just something, the further removed you get from it, the more lost that gets. And again, everybody that experienced it in real time, they'll always remember that. But when you look back and your kids talk to you about, hey, were you around when the Bucks won the championship? That's stuff that they won't remember. Some of the quotes that he made, though, one of the more interesting ones to me was, I get his point that it's been a year full of change, and it's one of the reasons why I know listeners and Bucks fans get tired of hearing it. But on this show, on the radio broadcasts, on some of the shows I do in TMJ too, patience is the word that I've probably used the most this season. That this is going to take time, and we need to be patient. And I think some of the comments that Giannis made speak to that with all the changes. And, mention we start with ownership changing, coach changed again, star players changed, Chris being in and out, like it's so much stuff that was just up and down. He went on and said, so many changes, so many injuries. That's the one thing about this year, is there really haven't been injuries. This has been a very, very healthy team, which we'll get to coming up on tomorrow's show when we take a look at this team moving forward. They've been one of the more fortunate teams in terms of their health. I know they're being bit by that bug with Chris Middleton right now, but that really hasn't been the case for the most part when you think about the games that Giannis has played in, and Damian Lillard and Brook Lopez, who continues to be an Iron Man, save for that one season here in Milwaukee. They've been fortunate there, but there's still been a whole lot of change. And I think the part that everybody was most curious to see how far back Giannis would peel the curtain in this discussion with Eric Nehm has to do with that second coaching change. And moving on from Adrian Griffin, look, and you're never going to get this from Giannis of, we had to move on, he wasn't good, or this and that, but you did start to see some things. And I think the one thing that stuck with me most is another word that we've heard used quite a bit since this coaching change was made, and that was structure. That we didn't have the structure that we had, and he talked about the culture and everything else that you and I and Frank have talked about, and Kane in previous years, of what Bud did building that culture, bringing it here and building everything from the ground level up. And you may have those things, but you still need to continue to harness it. And it seemed like, reading between the lines here, some of the things that Giannis had to say about a lack of structure, and Adrian Griffin learning on the fly too, that kind of bled through onto the court of, look, we don't have the structure. I don't know if he's implying we don't have accountability, but that oftentimes will come with structure. And there was just a number of things we were accustomed to doing for the last 5 years. We knew would change, but we didn't realize it would change quite this much.
Yeah, absolutely. I made a joke earlier with the Tech File guys in our group chat talking about this article, saying I think Eric said the joke, like, it's similar to when someone's married and they're like, you know what, the grass is greener. I'm going to go out here on these streets. I see the Instagram models. I'm going to go get me one of those. You go out there, you get an Instagram model, and you realize, hey, like, my laundry's not being done. Like, I'm not getting home cooked dinners the same way that I used to. Like, it's a little bit like, you thought this is what you wanted initially, but as you see, you figure out what you're missing from that stability that you had before with your wife. And that's the thing with Bud. Like, he creates a ground floor. He establishes a structure for the team, and you know exactly what your role is going to be within that. And with Adrian Griffin learning his first time putting together his coaching staff, it seems based on what he was saying in the article that it just wasn't as concrete, because he mentioned that when Doc came, it gave him a peace of mind. Like saying like Doc is tough. Same thing for Coach Bud. He mentioned Joe Prunty, just like Coach Griff was good. Do not get me wrong, and a great person, but like it was his first time doing this and he's figuring things out. But coming in with Doc, like he's won over 1,000 games. And I do think Griff did a great job while he was here. I mean, 30-13 record. Bravo, bravo. But this is different. And I don't feel like I have to be as vocal. I can have a little bit more taken off my plate now, because when you trust in your coaching staff to be prepared, that's the word he used too. Just, I know that they're going to be prepared. And the coaches that he named too were interesting to me. Like he mentioned Doc, he mentioned Prunty, he mentioned Rex,
Jason Kidd.
Jason Kidd. Yeah. And before as well, I meant that might even just be just because the kid was a former player at a very high level, that point guard mind, and being able to communicate it to him and have him establish what he's going to do. Now, we might argue that some of the things Kidd established that players do might not have been the best practice, but at least he had some type of structure that the players were playing within. So that was interesting to me as well, just seeing how much solace he took in the fact of having another veteran coach that can put together a structure that makes sense to the players and to him.
Yeah, you mentioned peace of mind, which he said specifically, and the toughness that Doc brings, and I'm not going to read between the lines here, as I've seen some people do, but part of the quote too was, Doc knows his bleep, and I don't take that as Adrian Griffin didn't know what he was doing, but it's just that peace of mind to know, as Giannis alludes to a little bit later in the quote too. Look, Doc has won 1,100 games as a coach, so he knows what he's doing in this sense. But that was one of the interesting parts to me was, he was very, very upfront with Adrian Griffin was figuring things out, how to lead a group of guys, how to operate with star players, and that can be challenging. Yeah. But again, that interesting part of, Doc, he's tough. He knows his stuff. Same with Coach Bud, same with Joe Prunty, same with Jason Kidd, and then quickly moved on to Griff's a great coach, a great person. But at the end of the day, it's his first time. And look, I think in fairness to Adrian Griffin and everybody involved here, that was the one thing that a lot of us were maybe not scratching our heads at, but when that decision was made and when it was Adrian Griffin, you just kind of wondered, how does this match the timeline for this team that, ordinarily, and I've talked about this before as well with Eric and Nehm, and we both kind of said, if it's just in a vacuum, I would much rather hire somebody new and see if I can find some new philosophy and a new spin on things and a new way to do things. You don't see that a lot with teams that are in the spot that the Bucks are in. And we can point to what the Celtics did with Ime Udoka, right? They didn't have championship expectations going into that year. It wasn't until after late January that the team started to look like, this can be a very, very dangerous team in the postseason. You saw those expectations that were just kind of dropped on Joe Mazzulla because of when that change was made, and he's had to kind of adjust and learn on the fly. So that was always the one thing that you looked at and thought, I don't know, this is a pretty big task to lay on any coach, especially one that is not just a first-time NBA coach, is a first-time head coach at any level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the exact same thing that I was thinking when the announcement was, or when the hire was announced as well. Because in addition to that, like we knew that Giannis was available to sign an extension. Like that was another piece of it where it's like, hey, it's a first-time head coach coming into town. Is he going to be able to run this team in a way that's going to encourage Giannis to sign as well? Because like that's a big piece of it. Like that's like if you're playing around with like your franchise cornerstone and his interest in signing long term, like that's a risk. And then when the Dame trade happens, now it turns from a team that's centered around Giannis to a team that's centered around Dame and Giannis. So now you have to help mesh these two superstars in their games, two guys who are used to being the alphas on their team, two guys who are used to having the ball in their team with high usage rates. So there were a lot of different things in the equation that Adrian Griffin was going to have to solve that was going to be difficult for him as a first-time head coach.
The offense is the area that has come under fire the most and drawn the most criticism since this coaching change. We've talked about those numbers on previous shows. Eric details them in the story as well. Giannis talked about it a little bit, but I do want to get a little bit into what Giannis said about some of the changes that were needed and evolving, and the importance of that in juxtaposition of where this team was prior to not just the coaching change, but coming into this season, the moves that they made in the offseason, and I think speak to the need to evolve. We'll get into that. And again, the MVP case for Giannis, because this year, more than any other, seems like not just in terms of title teams, but individual awards seems as wide open as I ever recall it. Giannis is certainly a name to be contended with in that MVP race, but how serious of a case does he have? Camille and I will dive into that coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We do want to remind you as well that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it is now also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts you've come to expect from Locked On, plus all of our national shows that dig into every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Evolving is a word that came up quite a bit as well, in that, Giannis said, look, there have been some things that we've quickly picked up from Doc Rivers, from this staff, and kind of seen, hey, this is something that we have that we can work with here. There's some other things that we got to get back to. And I think kind of alluding to some of the things we did that worked under Mike Budenholzer. We got to find a way to balance those two. But, as Giannis got into, it's important to evolve. He's talked about that personally and professionally, but sticking with the professional aspect, it's what we've talked about quite a bit for the last couple of weeks, really, Camille. And it was basically what we were getting into on that show we did just the other day, talking about the Damian Lillard trade and the trade-off of Dame versus Drew. And that's the Bucks evolving and realizing, look, you can't be one-dimensional, and that's what we were running into in the postseason. Now, the start of the season, they were also one-dimensional, but it's trying to thread that needle and find that balance of, okay, how much can we give up defensively, and how much more do we have to get out there on the offensive end from guys like Damian Lillard and possibly even a Malik Beasley?
Yeah, and they're going to have to contribute at some level. Like, the effort's going to have to be there. They're going to have to be able to execute what the scheme is that's being ran out on the court. And the use of the word evolve was interesting because he used evolve to say, like, we don't have to change our identity. Like, we just have to evolve a bit. Like, it's not wholesale changes that we have to do. We know what we need to do. We just have to come out and do it a bit better. And Giannis is always the guy who's going to say, like, it's not just anyone else. Like, it's me too. I have to do this. I have to be better. Although, as we've alluded to, like, he is putting up some career numbers, definitely MVP worthy numbers. And he's still saying, like, I can be better at this. I know I can. And for the success of the Bucks, I mean, he mentioned very clearly, like, I know that Dame is going to have to be Dame. He's going to have an ownership in this and understand that what his role is. Like, and that's what happens with every team that's combining superstars together. I think of the Miami Heat when they combined, D Wade with LeBron and Chris Bosh. And for a while, it was just kind of uneven for that team until D Wade went to LeBron and was like, hey, listen, this is going to be yours. Like, you have to take this team over. Like, I know I've been here in Miami, but like, Bron, you got to run the show here. And once they were able to establish what that dynamic was going to be between them, and then Chris Bosh, of course, had to be the guy to really sacrifice, take a lot back and see his numbers decline, but be a part of winning basketball. And that's something that the Bucks are still figuring out at this point in the season for them. And again, who knows what would have happened if there wasn't a coaching change, but there was one. So there's another adjustment on top of that adjustment that they've already been working on. And again, I know it sounds like excuses to some, but that's just the reality of the situation that the Bucks are in right now. Like, they did do these things and they're still navigating it. But what we've seen with the defensive efforts improving, it gives hope, because for a while there, I'm like, I don't know if they have the personnel at this point. Like, there was a point in the season early on where, like, I'm not sure if they have the personnel to be a top 10 defense, but we've seen that
15 even. Yeah.
15. Yeah, for sure. And they've shown that they can do that now with this group of guys here. And we still have to see how Pat Bev gets implemented into this, because it's only been a couple of games with him in the fray as well. So this team is still looking to evolve and figure out what their final form is going to be. And they got 26 games coming out of break to figure that out before the playoffs start.
We have to see how Pat Bev is implemented defensively with some more time, and reportedly how Danilo Gallinari is going to be implemented offensively for the Bucks, and to a lesser extent defensively. But what that's going to do, and that kind of brings me to the next point within that article, and that was Giannis getting into the $1 million question over the two-man game with he and Damian Lillard. As Eric had mentioned too, it's what's come up the most in this discourse too, of, why aren't you guys running as many pick and rolls, and why aren't we seeing you playing off of Dame quite as much? And, I think as Giannis laid it out, and I think we've started to hear more and more of this in recent weeks, is all of us were guilty of thinking that this was NBA 2K. And, well, how do you defend this pick and roll? But as we've heard Doc and a few others point out, and I believe Dame himself too, look, there are ways you can defend it. Maybe you can't do it every single time, but we need some reps at this, right? Like, two-man games, those work off of chemistry. And Giannis and Dame have to search for that, and they have to get to that level. But as Giannis said, it has to be organic. It can't just be give me the ball, I give the ball to Dame, I go and set a screen. Like, we got to work in a lot of things. Brooks going to dive, and we got to figure out where the rest of the spacing is. It's not as simple as you go set the screen. And I think that's important to point out, but it also speaks to the coaching that needs to take place and some of the diagramming. As Giannis said earlier in the interview, with the praise he gave to all of those assistants, this is a very good bench that the Bucks have now. That was another one of the questions that we had, benches in their coaching staff. Another question we had coming into the season is Adrian Griffin was an unproven coach. It was a relatively inexperienced bench of coaches as well, especially once Terry Stotts left the picture. Yeah. You had guys like Vin Baker and Josh Oppenheimer that have that, baked in chemistry and familiarity with Giannis, and Joe Prunty as well, and the experience that Joe Prunty has. But outside of that, it was a relatively inexperienced bench that you had. And now you get a shot in the arm there as well with a guy like Rex Kalamian and what he can do diagramming defenses, and a guy like Dave Yeager. And, we've put so much focus on the defense. You've seen some immediate results. It's going to be big for Dave Yeager and for Doc Rivers the second half of the season here to really start to diagram the offense and figure out, okay, we know once we start to load up some more and do some of these more Giannis and Dame screens, teams are going to blitz Dame, and they're just going to try to get the ball out of his hands, not let this play develop. So we have to work on, where does Brook get positioned? Once Chris is back and healthy, where is Chris positioned where Giannis or Dame has that quick outlet and easy read, and we can keep things flowing? That's all stuff that Giannis basically hinted at when he said it's not as simple as I just go set the screen and it's me and Dame. So it's going to be impossible to defend. And that's all fair. The other very, very encouraging thing to me that I heard or read, I should say, in this interview, and curious your thoughts as well, is, Giannis talked about, as you brought up earlier, I want Dame to be the Dame he was in Portland and all those Dame time years. I'm his biggest fan. I'm going to ride with him until the end. And even mentioned, down the stretch, he's going to get the ball. I want the ball in his hands, and he's going to be our closer. Even mentioned one thing that Doc Rivers brought up very, very early. It's still early overall into his tenure. But when Doc talked about, I want the ball in Dame's hands in transition. When Giannis gets the rebound, get it to Dame. And Giannis himself said, look, I've seen when he's the one that's bringing the ball up the floor, when we get it to him in transition, he gets into his rhythm. He can get his threes more, and he can get set up where defenses can't load up for you. So we've seen and read Giannis saying all the right things, and now it's really comes down to scheme and how do you make this work for the next 26 games?
Yeah, we've heard and read him saying all of the right things for sure. And even going into the All-Star break, he mentioned the fact like, hey, there are some things that we still need to clean up. I got to be better, so on and so forth. And when he mentions like getting the ball out to Dame and seeing Dame operate, like he mentioned it too when talking about their pick and roll chemistry and how it's so much different than when he runs it with Chris, because like Dame wants space. And that's a big difference from him and how he runs the pick and roll with Chris. And that makes so much sense when you think of Dame's game. Like he's a shot creator. Like he's trying to get into as much open space as he possibly can, so he has the most options available to him on how he plans to attack what's in front of him. So like that's an adjustment as well, because like when you've gotten so used to running a pick and roll with the same guy 10 plus years and their mannerisms, you have that chemistry, you might just think like this is how all pick and rolls are ran. Like this is how I've been doing it for the last 10 years. Like this is just how they go. And as he's learning Dame, and like you mentioned, he's Dame's biggest fan. And with that comes understanding where he wants the ball, how he wants to operate, how much space he needs. And they're still figuring out that equation. So when I saw Giannis call out the fact like Dame needs some space sometimes, like sometimes I just got to get the ball out to him and just let him go and do what he does. And other times when I'm setting him the pick, I got to set it in an angle that's going to give him the most space to operate. Like it's so much different. And I feel like him acknowledging that, and Dame talking about how at the All-Star break, it was just the two of them from the Bucks there together. They were able to have some conversations, some real heart-to-hearts. We have talked in previous episodes this week about Dame's advice that he got from Shaq and how Dame seemed to take that to heart, saying like, yeah, you're right. Like if this goes wrong, the blame's on Doc, it's on me, and it's on Giannis. So we have to figure this out. So it gives me hope going forward with this offense and how they can unlock it, because with the coaching change, that's the area for this team that has taken a back seat so far. And I wonder if it's partly conditioning, the new schemes, just figuring things out. We've talked about the injuries during this stretch and how it's affect their offense as well. So want to see this team get healthy and want to see them continuously running some of these actions so that come playoff time, it's like, it's easy. It's what you understand the dynamics and the angles and the space that's needed for it.
We've teased it quite a bit, so we will actually get into the case for MVP for Giannis. We also mentioned that name, Danilo Gallinari. Again, nothing official yet. The Bucks did make one official move that we can get into, but we'll get into that a lot more coming up on tomorrow's show when we take a look at the post All-Star break version of the Bucks. But coming up after our final break here, I do want to get into the MVP discussion, because as we said, everything seems to be wide open in the NBA this year, and that includes those individual awards. So we'll share our thoughts on Giannis's chances at a third MVP coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, get your buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. They are America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your team wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sports book partner of the NBA. Well, Camille, the case for MVP for Giannis, I don't think you can discount him just yet. I do think there's quite a bit of ground he would need to make up. Basketball Reference and their MVP tracker has usually been a pretty good barometer over who is going to end up winning the award. We have that. We have the straw polls that Tim Bontemps conducts of ESPN as well. In that latest straw poll from Tim Bontemps, Nikola Jokic was number 1. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was number 2. The Basketball Reference MVP tracker, Nikola Jokic, currently number 1 with a 38% chance to win the award. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is second with a 20% chance. Giannis is 4th behind Luka Doncic, who by the way, leads the league in scoring, removing Joel Embiid from all these numbers since he won't hit the games played threshold. So you have Luka Doncic with about a 14% chance and Giannis with just under 12%. Those are your top 4. So quite a bit of work that Giannis would need to do to surpass Nikola Jokic and even Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in this MVP race. I guess first and foremost, do you think Giannis will win the MVP this year?
I think he can. And if things break
so it
right,
sounds like a no.
right. But here's the thing, because looking at I think the numbers alone, like he should have a stronger consideration based on just the numbers alone. When I saw the straw poll and I saw how far in third he was, I said that was kind of shocking to me that he was that far behind Jokic and SGA. But SGA and Joker, so looking at their schedules going forward and their records, because they can both finish top of the conference. And I don't think the Bucks are going to be able to catch the Celtics at this point. The Nuggets have the 8th easiest remaining schedule. The Thunder have the 7th easiest remaining schedule in the league. And as we've mentioned, the Bucks have the 3rd toughest remaining schedule in the league and the toughest in the East. But that's the thing. Like, if Giannis can keep up his play and the Bucks do start reeling off wins with this schedule being what it is, I feel like you're forced to look at what he's doing. I know the narrative around the team with, the coaching change and just so much noise around the team, more noise than Bucks fans are used to around this team, between Doc Rivers doing interviews, between the Pat Bev podcast and going in Twitter wars against JJ Redick and everything going on. Like, it's more attention around this team than what the Bucks fans are used to. It's different this season. So, like, if Giannis can take this coming out of the break and continue putting up strong numbers, and this also translates to wins while the Bucks are understanding the process, I do think it's a chance. But like you said, the odds are long for him just based on who's in front of him and their numbers. But I do think Giannis's numbers alone, like, he should be in the running. Like, I won't write him off. I would put a bet on Giannis to win it based on the odds right now, just because, like, if he does get these wins, the Bucks do win, like, that could be a pretty nice little payday.
That's the thing that I was going to point out too, is, in terms of the MVP discussion, that could be a benefit to Giannis, the schedule that the Bucks have left. I still think I was surprised as well when you looked at just how far back he was of those two names. Nikola Jokic has been very, very good this year. I think if you forced me to make a selection right now, I would have to say Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, right? Like, Nikola Jokic, again, has been very good. It's been everything that we'd imagined he would be. He's been everything he has consistently been for the last few years. He's taken on a little bit more offensively than he did a season ago because of some of the personnel and injuries that the Denver Nuggets have had this year. But his numbers have been pretty in line with what he's done the last couple of years. And, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think the immediate reaction is, oh, really? Is it his time already? Like, doesn't it take a little bit more time to be inserted into that MVP discussion? But, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was a all-NBA player a season ago. He kind of jumped onto the scene there. The Thunder have been a revelation these last 2 years. And if you just use the optics of everything, the Oklahoma City Thunder may be the biggest story of the season so far, with where this team was a couple of years ago to the fact that at the All-Star break, they're 20 games above 500. Shea has clearly been the best player on that team. That I can understand why you would have those names in front of Giannis. To me, to the point that you made, the big thing and larger takeaway was just, man, that seems like that gap is a lot wider than it really should be, especially when you examine Giannis's numbers. And I think Eric included it in his piece. We've talked about it before as well. And that's just, if he finishes the season with these numbers that he's currently posting, it's Giannis and Oscar Robertson that are the only two that have accomplished this. So that does count for something. And again, it's a challenging schedule for this team. But if you come out of this in a good spot, that is going to boost Giannis's MVP chances. It is also going to put you in a much, much better spot for the playoffs as you move into that. So it's part of the good and the bad. The bad being, man, you're already in third place in the East. That's a very difficult schedule. You don't have a whole lot of margin for error, especially with how close those teams 4th and 5th currently are to you in the standings. The good part is, iron sharpens iron. And this is something that can really get you in a good spot for the postseason, assuming everything falls into place. And it can really inflate and boost Giannis's chance for a third MVP. Camille froze here, so we'll wrap it up here. But I don't think either of us expect that Giannis is going to win the MVP this season, but he does have a chance. A lot of it is going to come down to team success. And again, when you go through that schedule the Bucks have in the second half, if Giannis continues to post these numbers, he's going to have a very, very good chance. The one caveat you would add, though, is everything we just went through in the last segment there. You do wonder if we're going to see more of a Damian Lillard spike, and if that means Giannis's numbers start to tail off. But as I'm sure Giannis would tell you, if it gets the team in a better spot, he could not care less about what it means for his chances at an MVP. We will be back once again tomorrow in your final show of this break. It'll be our first show on the day of a Bucks game as we get set for the second half schedule, final third of the season, really. But we'll take a look at this second half for the Bucks. Best case scenario, worst case scenario, some of the high level discussion as we get set for the final stretch of games here. It starts on Friday, tomorrow, with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we'll get into all of that and get you set for the post All-Star break schedule coming up tomorrow on Locked On Bucks. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll catch up with you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.